Hello, everybody. I have muted you, but so that we can ensure that everybody is muted, but you can unmute yourselves to talk.
Morning, Sondra.
Good morning, Tom. I'm back in Texas.
You're back in town, huh? You're not, I saw you last week traveling in your car. I was wondering how you were going to do it.
Well, I didn't succeed.
I see that.
Welcome to Texas.
Thank you. I really did try to join last week, and it didn't work at all.
Whereabouts in Texas?
Oh, I've been everywhere. Right now I'm in Austin.
Oh,
But last week
Austin.
I was with Tom in Lubbock, and I was in a lot of different places in the Dallas area. I was in Houston. Now I'm in Austin, and tomorrow I go to Midland, Odessa.
Oh, wow, you are covering the state.
I am. Actually, even worse than initially planned, because I was supposed to come 2 weeks ago and then do this in an orderly fashion. But because my flight was canceled and I came a week later, I had to redo everything. So I'm going back and forth, but it's okay. All good. Thank God. All good.
That and all of our rain.
Yeah, there has been a lot of rain. That's true, but not too bad. Last night it rained here in Austin. Oh my goodness. And I went out for a minute. I had to get something from the car. And it was really fun because in Israel, we don't have warm rain. When it rains in Israel, it's cold, it's winter. So I went outside and it was just so fun to be in rain, get a bit wet, and it's warm outside. It was great.
All right, this is not working.
What isn't working? I hear you, Vanessa.
You hear? I cannot see you. I'm on my telephone outside and I'm not getting a picture.
Oh, you have to find a place where it says start video.
Yes, I may have to go back in the house. Oh, well.
Shalom, Sondra.
Oh, hi, Diane. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
How are you enjoying America?
Oh, it's very nice. I haven't been here in a year and a half, and it's really great to be here. I'm able to see people I haven't seen in a long time.
Good, good.
Oh, there you go.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, I have muted everybody. I don't know if it worked though.
Yes.
I muted
No, it
everyone.
didn't work, Sondra.
Pardon?
No,
It didn't work.
It didn't
no,
work.
it didn't work. Just a minute. We
Let me
can
try
mute
again.
individually, can we not?
Okay, well, we'll just ask everybody to mute themselves when they come in. For now, when we're chatting a bit, it's all great, but we've had a lot of complaints, and justifiably so, when people are even if they're not talking, but noises that are in your background become magnified with everybody else. And it not only makes it more difficult for us to hear one another or to hear what's going on or participate properly, but also the recording ends up being far more problematic
Right.
than it needs to be.
Okay.
So I would like to request that everybody mute themselves unless they want to say something.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if you all know this trick, but if you want to say something, instead of pressing the unmute, you can just press your space bar. If you press your space bar, then that will just unmute for the amount of time that you're actually, talking. and then you release the space bar and you go back to mute. And that is the easiest way to control the mute, to enable you to talk, but then to immediately go back to mute. Okay, so let me
Oh,
just
Doesn't work
repeat.
on,
Thank you. Thank you.
I don't think it works on an iPad.
No, on an iPad, it might not. On a computer, it does. So on an iPad, you just have to press, unmute if you want to talk.
Yeah.
But those of you who are with a regular laptop or a regular computer with a keyboard, you can just press the
Yeah.
space bar. That will temporarily unmute you for as long as you hold down the space bar. Anyway, I'm just going to request again that everybody put themselves on mute,
Okay.
so that we can have a more organized lesson. And then, of course, there will be opportunity for people to say something.
Okay.
We'll just wait another minute. More people are getting on.
Hello, this is Maria joining in from Guatemala.
Oh, wow. Hi.
How you doing, Sandra?
Good.
Get
Good.
my
May I
book.
remind everyone to make sure you're on mute. Okay,
Yes.
unless you're about to talk, and then you can release the mute to say something and then put the mute back. Okay, I see one person trying to connect. Okay, so we will get started. Hello, everyone. I missed you all last week. I was traveling in Texas and could not teach. I hope you enjoyed Shmuel. He was gracious enough to step in for me instead. Today, I am still in Texas, but I am at a place where I can sit and teach, and it's wonderful to be back. So this week's Torah portion is Shelach, and it's actually one of my favorite Torah portions of all. If there is one unified message that emerges from this Torah portion, it is the importance of loving and treasuring the land of Israel. And of course, we learn about the spies and the terrible sin that they committed and the sin that they encouraged the nation to commit, and that they spoke ill of the land of Israel. And of course, we're going to delve into that now in much greater detail. So first of all, I want to just kind of set the stage, what we like to do, to remember, always remember the context. Whenever you're reading scripture, whenever you're reading a particular story, the story itself is extremely important. The message of the story is very important, but you must always remember the context. And if we look at this Torah portion in its context in the book of Numbers, if you recall, the name of the series is the Nitty Gritty of Nationhood. And what that refers to is that here in this book, we're basically talking about the nation going through the daily business of being a nation, the pitfalls, the stumbling blocks, as well as the high points. Now, the whole beginning of the book sets out a very organized structure of the nations. We have a discussion of the various camps, the various flags, where every tribe is supposed to stand. We have a census focusing on the men of military age. And this is, of course, all part of the preparations that need to be made in order to come into the land of Israel and conquer it. It's a very practical sort of setup. They have to be ready to conquer, to have an army and conquer the land as soon as they enter. But we also have a level of spiritual preparedness. But the type of spiritual preparedness that we are discussing in the book of Numbers is, again, more structural than anything else. We have the position of the Ark of the Covenant in the middle, the position of the tabernacle in the middle of the camp. We have a separate census of the Levites, and we have a great sense of their job in the marching and in the procedure that the nation will go through as they enter the land and once they enter the land. And then last week, we have really the final preparations. We have the trumpets. We have the fact that the nation is ready to go. Moses turns to Jethro and says, why don't you join us? We could use your expertise. And the chapter 10 ends, okay, which is last week's portion. Chapter 10 ends with this wonderful, wonderful verse. It's chapter 10, verse 35. Oh, and by the way, today I only have a Hebrew Bible with me, so it's the Sondra Baras translation that you are going to be listening to today. Okay, and when the ark travels, Moses says, "Arise, O Lord, and disperse your enemies. May those who hate you run from before you." And here we have, it's a battle cry in a sense, but it's a very spiritual battle cry. It's very clear that now the camp is ready, the trumpets are ready, they're about to go forward. The ark is in the middle, and Moses basically says, "Arise, God, we need you." Here's the ark. As the ark is about to travel, Moses turns to God and said, "Please do your thing, disperse our enemies so that our entry into the land of Israel will be easy." And immediately following that, we have the beginning of the end, what I call the seeds of disaster. And the chapter 11 begins with the complaints. And of course, that's what Shmuel was discussing last week, the whole issue of complaints, what are complaints and how they can be so problematic. What we're going to see now in the, wait, before I get, so we have the complaints, and then right after that, we have Moses expressing a lack of confidence in his own leadership. We see a weakening of his leadership as he turns to God and says, "I can't do this by myself," where we have the 70 prophets who then come in and receive the Spirit of God as well. And we also see at the very end of the Torah portion, Miriam and Aaron speaking ill of Moses. So we have already the seeds of a weakening or a challenge to Moses's leadership, and the seeds that are planted on that issue last week, we will see taken up in next week's Torah portion. Okay, this week's Torah portion, we see what happens. It's more or less the continuation of the seeds of conflict that are sown in last week's Torah portion with regard to complaints. Okay, and what we're going to see in this week's Torah portion is the complaints running wild and really, really causing the downfall of the nations. So let's talk about the beginning of the Torah portion, chapter 13. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Send forth men who will tour the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel, one man for each tribe. You should send each the princes of." Okay, so what we see here is the Torah portion opens with God's command to Moses to choose or to take the heads of each tribe and send them on a reconnaissance mission to tour the land of Israel. Now, unlike the sending of the 2 spies that Joshua does later on at the beginning of the book of Joshua, this is really, when I call it a reconnaissance mission, it's really not such a reconnaissance mission. Because first of all, the word spies is not used here at all, but the word used is latour, to tour, literally to tour. It's the same word in Hebrew and in English, to visit the land. Okay, they are not told to spy. And of course, if you are sending spies, you're going to send 1, maybe 2 people at most. Sending 12 people into the land, if you're trying to be secret about something, it's not going to work. So this is less a reconnaissance mission and more some kind of, touring. Let's gain an impression, going in a way that is not spying on military installations per se. Okay, now there's a little bit of a conflict here, because in this week's Torah portion, it seems that it is God who initiates this whole project. And of course, this project ends in disaster. So people may ask, why did God initiate this project? Why did he even bother with this whole thing? Knowing what we, of course, know after we've read last week, that this is a nation that is not necessarily people that you can rely on. Look at what would happen already in last week's complaining, the sin that comes from the complaining. Can we really rely on these 12 men to do what they're supposed to do in good faith? Okay. Now, if we compare the way this story is written here with the way it is recorded in Deuteronomy. Now, you know that Deuteronomy is Moses's summary of many of the events that happened before. And in many cases, we have Moses summarizing events, and the way he records them in Deuteronomy is a little different than the way they're recorded in the book of Numbers. And this, in this case, this is one of the examples. So if you would like, you could look at Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 22. Here Moses is addressing the nation. He says, you all came to me. Okay, you came to me saying, let us send people before us that they shall dig out the land. The word used in Hebrew is vayachperu. And that word definitely, by the way, speaks of some kind of surveillance, some kind of, secret, undercover kind of situation. And they will bring us back word of the way in which we will go up, the cities that we will come to. And then it says, and I was happy with this, and then I appointed these people. So here there seems to be an inherent contradiction. Who is it that initiated the plan? Was it God, as we have in the book of Numbers, or was it Moses, actually the nation, and then Moses responding? And there are commentaries who basically combine the two and say the initial initiative was indeed the nation. But God blessed this initiative. And he said yes to Moses. It wasn't just that Moses said it was good for me, but that God said to Moses, yes, good idea. Send these people forward. Okay. And that also helps us to understand where God's role was in all of this. I mean, initially, the actual suggestion to go and check out the land was not a bad suggestion. And therefore, there was no problem. God didn't feel a need to stop it. But you can say God would not necessarily have initiated it on his own, because he probably had full awareness of where this could go. But he was willing to let the nation take leadership on this and let them make their own choices, and let's see what happens. Okay, now they go into the land, and we're back in the book of Numbers, chapter 13. And we have verse 21. And they went up. Notice, by the way, whenever we have a verb that is used to denote going to the land of Israel, very often that verb is, and they went up. And indeed, even to this day, I don't know, many of you probably are familiar with the term aliyah. Aliyah is the term used for Jews who immigrate to Israel, okay? It does not mean immigration, it means going up. And it's coming from the biblical verb that is used in this context and in other contexts when referring to going to the land of Israel. They go up and they tour the land from the Sin desert until the edges of Hamat, which is, by the way, all the way in the north. It is near Syria. And they went up in the Negev. Now here is some place where I have to use my Hebrew translation, because nearly every, my Hebrew, original Hebrew, not Hebrew translation, my Hebrew Bible, because in almost every English translation, if not every one that I have checked, here we have a mistranslation. The actual Hebrew literally reads as follows: and they went up in the Negev, and he came to Hebron. There is a definite change in tense from the plural to the singular. Most English translations just say they went up to the Negev and came to Hebron, without noting this difference in from plural to singular. Now the Midrash, our ancient Jewish sages that are offering commentary on the Bible, often through the use of stories that may supplement some of the holes in the Bible. Sometimes there's stories that you can see clearly are the source of them is some kind of a problem or inconsistency in the language itself. Sometimes it's borne out by information that we have surrounding the biblical story. These are traditions that have passed down through the Jewish people. Feel free to accept them or reject them, but I love using the Midrash because I believe it always tells us something very interesting that enlightens our view of the text itself. In this case, the Midrash notes the difference between the plural going up and to the Negev and the singular going to Hebron, and notes that only one person went to Hebron. Who was it? Caleb. Now, in this case, by the way, the Midrash is completely, 100% completely found its foundation in Scripture itself. Because later on in the book of Joshua, Caleb in Joshua chapter 14, Caleb approaches Joshua and requests Hebron, requests that Hebron should belong to him. And what he says there, this is Joshua chapter 14. Let's see, says verse 12, and now give me this mountain which God spoke to me on that day. And then he talks about a place that has giants. And he says before, oh yeah, here it is. Verse 9, Joshua 14, verse 9. Moses swore on that day, any place where you have placed your foot, talking to Caleb, will be for yours, for an inheritance for your children forever. Okay. And then later on, he says, and now please give me this hill. And Joshua gives him Hebron. So it's very clear that the one person who went here to Hebron was Caleb. Okay. And then we see that from Joshua 14. Anyway, what does the Midrash though say? He says Caleb separated himself from the group for a short time, went to Hebron to pray at the tomb of the forefathers, the tomb of the patriarchs, which is in Hebron. Even today, you can go visit. There's an amazing Herodian structure that's built on top of the tomb. It is where Abraham and Sarah, Jacob and Rebecca, Isaac and Rebecca, Jacob and Leah are all buried. He goes there, he prays at the tomb of the forefathers in a way, and this is an ancient Jewish tradition, to pray at the tomb of someone, basically saying, we are not praying to dead people, don't worry, we don't believe in saints, none of that stuff, but we are praying to God saying, remember the fellow over here and how wonderful he was? Please remember his righteousness, and may that be, in a way, some kind of a favor for me. In this case, Caleb is saying, remember, God, your promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the people right here, okay, that you promised the land to. Please, help me succeed in this mission. Now, one of the things that's so interesting about this Midrash is that it says something about Caleb's frame of mind. The Midrash is saying that Caleb is entering the land with trepidation. Trepidation different than the others, because there's no question for 12 people to enter into a land full of enemies, they should all feel trepidation. What if we're caught? What if we're captured? What if they suspect us of about to enter the land, all that stuff. So that is not the kind of trepidation that would be different for Caleb than anyone else. But if Caleb already separates himself from the group and is praying on his own for something different, then it may well be that he's already sensing that there's a fear, there's a trepidation here about where the minds and hearts of his other, companions are on this trip. Will they be faithful to the word of God? Will they be faithful for God's plan as revealed to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? That is what the Midrash is essentially trying to say, that Caleb already, as he's entering the land, has this fear. Where is this mission going to end up? And I think we already, of course, we've read this all many times, but if we've already, even if we just read last week's Torah portion, and we see the nature of the complaints of the nation of Israel, there's certainly a foundation for fear. And that's certainly something that Caleb would have been aware of. Okay, now they come back. And of course, this is when all the trouble starts. In verse 27 through 29, very interesting the way these 12 men, or actually 10 of them, report. They start with very good things. They start in verse 27. They said, we came to the land which you have sent us to. It is a land flowing of milk and honey, and these are its fruits. Remember, they gathered some grapes. And that, by the way, is the symbol of the ministry of tourism in Israel. It's the two spies carrying on these long poles the grapes, the large grapes of Israel. So that's the good part of it, and these are its beautiful fruits. But then what does they say, starting in verse 28? Oh, but that's meaningless, because the nation who dwells in this land is so powerful. They have very large and fortified cities, and we saw the giants there, okay? Amalek is in the Negev, and the Hittite and the Jebusite, the Amorite are dwelling in the mountains. The Canaanites are by the sea and near the Jordan, okay? This is not going to a good place. And Caleb recognizes it right away, and he immediately tries to divert the nation's attention away from where those spies are going. He says, no, We will go up and we will inherit it because we can do it. We can do it. Okay, yes, we can. But then the other people contradict him and they say, no, we cannot go up. The nation is far too powerful for us. And then in verse 32, we get the punchline, okay? And they slandered the land. They slandered the land which they visited to the children of Israel, saying, the land that we passed through in order to visit, it is a land who consumes its dwellers. Okay? And all the people that we saw there were giant people, very large people. We saw the giants, and we looked in their eyes as grasshoppers. Okay? And that, of course, was the final death knell on this report. And the nation responded by crying. You know, they were very, very, very upset. Okay, so very interesting, by the way, that these scriptural words are words that we use all the time today. Okay, when we talk about people libeling, you know, there's so much going on all over the world with you know, people saying terrible things about Israel, about the land of Israel, about the people of Israel. There's so much bad politics. And when we see that there are sometimes, unfortunately, even Israelis or even Jews who participate in this festival of slandering Israel, we will use these terms straight from the Bible. We will say they are slandering the land of Israel. And another thing is unfortunately, we have very real problems in Israel. And we have been dealing with these problems ever since we have returned to the land in modern times. We will always also say, kind of tongue in cheek, it is a land who devours its inhabitants, you know, because it is a land that has so much difficulty and so many challenges. Okay, but what we see here is real diversion in perspective. I am sure that both Caleb and the others will all agree on the reality that they perceived. Nobody is lying. They did see beautiful fruits and they did see giants. The slander is when you are skewed in your reporting, when you take a perspective about the facts that is problematic. Okay, and what we could see here, by the way, if we just look at in verse 31 and 32, we see exactly the difference in perspective. In verse 31, the spies say, we cannot go up, okay? And then we see the response of one second. Okay, in the response of Joshua and Caleb in chapter 14, verse 7, okay, they say, the land that we pass through is a very, very good land. If God wants us, if he favors us, he will bring us to this land. He will give us this land, which is a land flowing of milk and honey. That's the whole difference of perspective. The 10 spies say, can't do it, too difficult, even though it's a beautiful land and it's rich and it has the milk and honey, can't do it. Caleb and Joshua say, you're right. It's a big, powerful land and it is with milk and honey, but we can do it if God wants us to do it. It's all about what God wants, okay? And you have to take into account God's participation. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to practically and realistically assess what it is that's going to happen. When I see this situation, I picture the nation and this, you know, Joshua and Caleb on one hand, everybody else on the other hand. And I can't help but be reminded of a man, a very important man in Israel in modern history, who was actually called himself a secular man, but in so many ways, I think was guided by an internal spirituality that he sometimes denied. And that was David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first prime minister. On the eve of Israel becoming a state, the British were on their way out. The Arabs were on their way in to attack 5 Arab armies in the state of Israel. No army, no air force, just a ragtag people with a few old Czech guns and 4 broken down airplanes left over from World War II. This is what there was, okay? And good people all over the world, whether it was countries like United States, whether it was Jews in Israel and abroad, who were frightened, who were terrified, who said, you are facing giants. You cannot survive. Do not declare a state. Turn this over to the UN, become a UN protectorate. That is the only way that you are going to be protected. David Ben-Gurion had a terrible decision to make, because if he looked at the situation, there is no way in the world he could have prevailed. No practical way whatsoever. And yet something inside him, and that has always been the question we have all had. What made David Ben-Gurion take the decision to announce the state? And he did. Okay. And I believe that this came from an innate belief that God would be with them. Okay. And he may not even been willing to recognize it, but there's no other explanation. Okay. And that's what happened. And we see how critical it is to have that sort of faith. Anyway, if we look to after the report of the spies in the beginning of chapter 14, we see that the nation cried. And there's a wonderful Midrash here that basically says, you cried, oh, God, it puts words in God's mouth. It's a beautiful, beautiful Midrash. And the Midrash says, God spoke to the nation of Israel. You're crying over nothing. I will give you something to cry about. And the tradition is that on that day was actually the 9th of Av, okay? The 9th of Av, which is in the summer, and that is the same day where terrible things have happened to the Jewish people throughout. In the book of Second Kings, we learn it's the 9th of Av, or in those days between the 7th and the 10th of Av, that the first temple is destroyed and the exile begun into Babylon. The second temple is destroyed on the same day. The defeat of the Bar Kokhba rebellion later in the 2nd century on the same day. Number of terrible incidents, including incidents in the Crusades, including incidents in the Holocaust, all happened on the 9th of Av. The expulsion of Jews from Spain in 1492 was on the 9th of Av. So in a way, this Midrash, we have seen it. The Midrash was written centuries earlier. It was written probably somewhere around the 4th or 5th century. It was actually quoting people that were much earlier, probably written just after the destruction of the Second Temple. And this is this idea. You cried over nothing. God is going to give something to cry out over. We see then their punishment was they had to wander for another 40 years in the desert. Now, 40 is an archetypal number. Very often in the Bible, we have numbers that are used over and over again. Doesn't necessarily mean it was exactly that amount of time. It could be, but it also has deeper significance. So the number 7, for example, is all over the Bible, but so is the number 40. Moses goes up to Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights. In the book of Judges, the standard period of time that a judge would reign is 40 years. When a judge reigned 20 years, you knew it was a particularly bad period. And when a judge reigned 80 years, you knew it was a super period of time. 40 basically means typical period of time, or in this context, a generation. They have to be a full generation. They have to take their time. They have to do a full period of time in the desert before they can go into the land. In other words, it'll be the next generation that is going to go into the land. This generation is tainted. This generation is not going to be able to accomplish what needs to be accomplished. Okay, now just one more thing in passing. At the very end of this story, chapter 14, verses 40 to 45, we have a group of people who are chastened by this punishment and figure, oh, we can fix this. Okay, let's go right now. We understand we did wrong, and they immediately go right. They say they want to go up. And Moses cautions them not to. What does he say in verse 42? He says, do not go up because God is not amongst you. Okay? And they went up anyway, and they're destroyed by the Amalekites. And what we learn is in verse 44, they went up to the top of the hill, but the ark of the covenant of the Lord and Moses did not move from the camp. This tells us more than anything. If you go up and God is with you, you will succeed. If you go up and God is not with you, you will not succeed. Now, one of the very interesting words that we have here, a word is very unique. It says vaya'apilu, okay? And we see this word in in verse 44, okay? Vaya apilu, what does that word mean? It is translated as meaning either presumed or dared, okay? There is this presumption, there is this almost rebelliousness in these people. Yes, they're going up, and we just heard going up is what everyone should want to do, but here they dared to go up. And it is this daring to go up, this presumption of going up against God's will, when God is not with them, that brings them their punishment. Now, it's very ironic because this very same word was used in the 40s was given to the campaign to illegally immigrate to Israel when the British were in the land. And the people who were organized it were called ma'apilim, literally meaning darers. What a difference, though. In that case, the people were daring British authority to go into the land in fulfillment of prophecy, in fulfillment of God's will. In our case, they are daring God's authority. And of course, in that case, they have no chance but to lose. Okay, now I just want to kind of summarize some of the ideas that we saw here in this whole teaching. So first of all, we talked about the seeds of the downfall, complaints. And I would like to just say, I am an eternal optimist. And very often people say, oh, you're not being realistic. Okay, what's the difference between a pessimist and an optimist? Of course, a pessimist is always complaining. A pessimist always sees reality and says, oh, it's going to be terrible. It's going to be terrible. An optimist is not necessarily somebody who doesn't see reality, sees the same reality, but gives it a completely different twist. And I would propose that one of the differences between between a pessimist and an optimist, both are realistic, but the optimist views the facts, views reality through a prism of faith. And that takes them into optimism. And that's what divided Joshua and Caleb on one hand and the other spies on the other. Secondly, ultimately, success always requires both human activity and God's blessing. Without human activity, we go nowhere. But if human activity is going to go forward and God is not going to be part of the package, it will be doomed to success. Third, what we found here is that as the nation matures, they are going to be able to find the balance that will enable them to enter the land. A balance that we see in our story. We have on the one hand, at the beginning, they're talking against the land and they don't want to move. And at the end, the people who want to go up the land, but God is not with them. They need to find that balance, the balance that understands human initiative is very important. They need the bravery, they need the audacity, but they need to do it in God's time. And here, what you do, and I will end with this, there's no question that the overwhelming message from this Torah portion is the centrality of the land of Israel, how important the land is. When they slander the land, God gives them a terrible punishment of wandering the desert for 40 years. How important the land is, how important it is that the people of Israel treasure the land of Israel. And of course, the punishments and the rewards, and we'll see this later on, we already saw it at the end of Leviticus, the punishments and the rewards to the nation are so often centering on the land. The relationship of the people of Israel to the land of Israel is critical, but it all has to be within the context of God's plan and God's blessings. So that's all I have to say for today, but I'd love to hear your comments and questions. Unmute yourselves if you have anything to say. Those of you who have to go, don't feel bad, you can leave, but those of you who have questions or comments, happy to hear them.
Sondra, I looked up the word afal, and it says that they showed heedlessness. So they were lacking concern, or they showed presumption. I
Right.
thought that was interesting instead
Yeah.
of translated defiantly like I had in my translation.
Right. Well, I saw two different translations. One was presumed and one was dared. And I think they both reflect an element of, adversarial. They're adversarial to God, presumed something that they shouldn't have been doing. Dare just takes it a little bit further.
Yeah.
Good point.
And what do you think of the new government? Is it Yesh Atid?
Well, I'm going to actually do an update about that next week.
Okay.
Or when next week?
If
no,
it
week and a
holds
half,
for a
something like
week.
that. I will. I want to let the dust settle. I have a lot of faith in Naftali Bennett. I too believe, like he does, that while a right-wing government would have been better, there was no right-wing government. And the fifth elections was a terrible alternative because it would have just returned us to where we are now. The nation needs healing. And with this government will be a balance between right and left. There will be things that we may not be able to accomplish, but there are also things that the left will not be able to accomplish. But it will be nice to have a government where right and left can actually speak to each other with respect without these extraneous political considerations, unfortunately, and power plays that Netanyahu in recent years has brought to play and what has brought us to this point to begin with. Sadly.
And so he is an observant Jew, which I think it's positive.
Yes, Naftali Bennett is just like me.
Right.
Religious Zionist. I want you to know that
Yeah.
he was the head of the Yesha Council for a number of years, the head of the council, the umbrella organization that unites all of the communities in Judea and Samaria.
And it's the first time, I think it is, right?
Oh yeah, first time
so
religious
this is
prime minister,
remarkable.
first times, and from our point of view, not just religious, right-wing religious. So, you know, I trust this man, and frankly, he and Gidon Sa'ar both are to the right of Netanyahu in policies. We'll see. I mean, there's a lot of question marks here. Are they going to be able to function with such left-wing parties like, you know, Meretz and Labor in the mix? Who knows? But we have to also remember that Meretz and Labor gave up a lot, okay, to endorse someone like Bennett as prime minister.
Yes, yes. Sondra, back to the idea of balance. I felt that the balance was very much affected by how the princes that went into the land, how they looked upon themselves. I think it's at the end of chapter 13 where they say that we were in our own eyes as grasshoppers compared to giants. And
excellent.
If you
look
upon
wonderful point. And actually, there's a commentary that talks about, you know, initially when Moses gave them the mandate, he said, check out, right? Are these cities fortified or are they open cities? And there's a commentator that says, what were they judging? That if they are fortified cities, it's a sign that they are frightened. They are confident. They feel they need the walls to surround them. Whereas if they're open cities, they are living in freedom and as lords of the land. Now, in fact, what they did find was fortified cities. But instead of viewing it from that perspective, oh, fortified cities, they're worried, okay? We can come because we have God with us. Instead, they took the grasshopper view and they said, walled cities, oh no, that means they're big and the cities are powerful and you know, all that kind of thing. So I agree with you 100% that it's a question of their perspective. Very much dependent on how they viewed God's role in the whole thing and how much they felt they could rely on God. Now, I have to say that some of the original settlement leaders would quote this whole situation. And there was one woman who was the mayor of Kedumim for many, many years. Her name was Daniela Weiss. And she would always say, she said she refused to have a fence around Kedumim. You know, but the army recommended fences as an important security thing. And the army was probably right. But she said, no way are we going to have a fence, because then it'll be like, we're masters of this land. We don't need a fence. Okay. Now she did have cameras.
Wow.
But anyway, I just thought it was so interesting that it was so important to her and to so many in the original founders of the settlement movement, that attitude is so.
Yes.
Do we see ourselves as masters of the land?
Yes.
Or are we afraid of every enemy that seeks us out? And
Yes.
You're right. Attitude is extremely important.
Yes. Now, the other thing I noticed, and it is going on from where you talked today, but it's, I think, at the end of the Torah portion, Numbers 15, chapter 15, verse 15, after he goes through the offerings that are made by fire, in verse 15, he says, one ordinance shall be both for you of the congregation and also for the stranger that sojourneth with you, an ordinance forever in your generations. As ye are, so shall the stranger be before the Lord. Is this the first time that the stranger is brought into the offerings and told that the stranger would be equal to the
Well,
people?
I think there's also mention of the stranger when it comes to the Passover sacrifice.
Yes,
Right.
yes, yes.
You know,
But this is generally, though, this looks as if it's it's general, more general than specific to the Passover.
well, the way this is interpreted is that it is not the pagan stranger. It is a stranger who has taken himself to join the nation of Israel and joins together
Right.
with the nation of Israel in the belief in
Right.
one God.
Right,
Okay.
right.
And that's
Oh, yes,
very-
of course.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that's very, very
Yes.
important. And what
Yes.
basically I would say the attitude of most of the Bible is that Judaism is not a genetic issue. Okay. It is, yes, it is a genetic in the sense that there is a nation and they're descended from the same family,
From
etc.
one man.
But
Mhm.
there is this ability to join the nation if you join the faith.
Yes,
And you
Yes.
have that. You have that idea.
yes. Okay,
All
thank
right.
you.
Anybody else with a comment before we sign off?
Our perspective determines our reality. That's a quote that yes. So there.
Okay. Wonderful.
Right? Yeah.
Good, good. All right. Well, it's great seeing you all today. Next week, I will be back in Israel. Please God, and nothing, if everything is good, I'm supposed to land in Israel Thursday morning, and I will be Thursday morning Israel time, and I will be back on line teaching Bible from Israel, which is where it belongs, being taught. I'll see you all next week. Thank you so much.
Shalom, Shabbat shalom.
Sandra.
Shabbat shalom. Have a great weekend.
Shalom.
This told.